The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. The stakes were high. It was a legal battle involving one of the world's most famous billionaires, Elon Musk. He wasn't there to fight a typical lawsuit. This was something far bigger. The accusations? Securities fraud. Market manipulation. If the allegations were true, Musk could lose everything he'd worked for. Tesla, SpaceX, his reputation, and the very future he'd spent years building. But as the courtroom settled, an eerie calm descended. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for being unyielding, glanced over the room with a look that could freeze the most hardened criminals in their tracks. On the opposite side, Musk sat in his usual manner, calm, composed, and as confident as ever. But there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of certainty. He knew something that no one else did. The judge cleared her throat, then leaned forward, her gaze locking on Musk. "You think you can outsmart the system, Mr. Musk?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The room went quiet. Musk didn't flinch. He merely smiled slightly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest of his chair. The judge continued, "You've built rockets, you've built electric cars, but you think you can beat us in a court of law? You are no genius here, Mr. Musk. You're just another man accused of breaking the rules. And the law is unforgiving." Musk's expression remained unshaken, almost as if the words had no weight on him at all. He didn't respond immediately, but his silence felt like a response in itself. He wasn't intimidated. Then, in a voice low but firm, Musk finally spoke. "I don't plan to outsmart anyone, Your Honor. I just plan to tell the truth, and that will be more than enough." The judge's lips tightened. She wasn't used to this kind of response. But as the proceedings went on, something strange happened. Musk, despite being the subject of ridicule and mockery from both the judge and the opposing counsel, seemed to thrive under the pressure. His every move, every word, was calculated with a precision that few could match. And then, just when it seemed like the case would drag into a routine legal battle, Musk did something no one could have anticipated. Something that would make the entire courtroom fall silent, questioning everything they thought they knew about him. "Your Honor," Musk said, his voice calm yet undeniably confident, "I request permission to submit an additional piece of evidence. It's something I believe will change the course of this trial." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And what is this evidence, Mr. Musk? Another one of your outlandish ideas?" Musk smiled, standing up slowly, causing a ripple of tension in the room. "It's not just an idea," he replied. "It's a fact, and when you see it, you'll understand why I'm here today. Not as a defendant, but as someone trying to expose a much larger truth." The room held its breath. "Permission granted," the judge said reluctantly, her curiosity piqued despite herself. With a slow, deliberate motion, Musk handed over a sealed envelope to the court clerk. The clerk took it to the judge, who opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper, a document that, at first glance, seemed unremarkable. The judge skimmed through it quickly, but her eyes widened as she reached the final line. She looked up at Musk, speechless, the weight of the document sinking in. It wasn't just another piece of legal paperwork, it was a game-changer. Something that no one had expected. "Mr. Musk," the judge began, her voice faltering. This is highly irregular. I don't know how you obtained this, but—" "I'll explain everything, Your Honor," Musk interrupted. His voice was steady, unwavering. "But first, I want everyone in this room to understand something very clearly. This trial is not about me. It's about something far more important." The tension in the courtroom became palpable. The judge's earlier mockery was replaced by a sense of uncertainty. She couldn't ignore what was now in front of her, and the room could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with the judge and opposing counsel trying to make sense of the document Musk had submitted. They were all left with one question. How had he managed to pull this off? The judge was not one to be easily swayed, but even she had to admit that this unexpected turn had thrown her completely off balance. For the first time in her career, she was forced to reconsider the assumptions she had made about this case, and about Musk himself. As the court session was adjourned for the day, the air was thick with speculation. What was this document? What did it mean for the case? And most importantly, how had Elon Musk managed to outmaneuver everyone in the room? The next day, the world would begin to understand, and it would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk didn't grow up with the privileges of a typical Silicon Valley billionaire. In fact, his early life was anything but glamorous. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk was the son of a Canadian mother and a South African father. His childhood wasn't the picture of ease, with his parents' divorce when he was just 10 years old being one of the first major turning points in his life. The experience left Musk with a sense of solitude, but it also ignited a deep, unyielding desire to prove himself, to escape his circumstances, and to do something extraordinary. From a young age, Musk had an insatiable thirst for knowledge. His mother, May, an author and dietitian, often spoke of how Elon would read through books faster than most children his age. He was a dreamer, fascinated by technology and space, and often found himself retreating into books and later, his own ideas. His first entrepreneurial venture came at the age of 12, when he sold a homemade video game called Blaster to a computer magazine for $500. Though small, it was a significant step, the first proof that Musk had the mind of a visionary. Despite his early success, Musk's school years were filled with bullying and isolation. He was known to be an introvert, quiet, and often lost in thought. In one particularly brutal incident, Musk was pushed down a flight of stairs by bullies, resulting in broken bones. He didn't fight back, nor did he ever share this experience with others at the time. Instead, he buried himself further into his studies, already learning that life wouldn't give him any shortcuts, and that he would have to earn everything on his own terms. In his late teens, Musk moved to Canada, where he attended Queen's University, eventually transferring to the University of Pennsylvania. He didn't just focus on business or engineering. Musk's interests were vast. He earned degrees in both economics from Wharton School and physics from the College of Arts and Sciences. But what truly set him apart was the way he saw the world. His belief that humanity could, and should, reach beyond Earth. After graduation, Musk moved to California in 1995 to pursue a PhD at Stanford University. However, after just 2 days, he made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He dropped out. With the rise of the internet in the mid-90s, Musk knew he had to seize the moment. He co-founded Zip2, a software company that helped newspapers create online directories, and quickly sold it for $307 million. That success was only the beginning. Musk would go on to found X.com, which would later become PayPal, revolutionizing online payments. After eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion in stock, Musk was ready to go even further. In 2002, he founded SpaceX with the goal of making space travel affordable and accessible to the masses. Just a few years later, Musk also became the CEO of Tesla, driving the future of electric vehicles. Each venture wasn't just about making money. Musk's vision was always grander. He wanted to solve global problems. His ambitions were intertwined with his passion for science and technology. Whether it was colonizing Mars, creating sustainable energy solutions, or developing a Hyperloop transportation system, Musk saw possibilities others couldn't even imagine. But despite his achievements, Musk's life wasn't without its trials. Along the way, he faced ridicule, criticism, and challenges that could have broken even the toughest entrepreneurs. Many in the tech world viewed his ideas as overly ambitious, too risky, too futuristic. He often found himself at odds with investors, board members, and even his own employees. At times, it seemed like the weight of the world was on his shoulders, but Musk always pressed forward. In the eyes of the world, Musk was a genius, yes, but also a man of contradictions. His reputation was built on both his brilliance and his unpredictability. He could be charismatic, yet abrasive, brilliant, but prone to making statements that sent the media into a frenzy. And when it came to business, he was relentless. Musk had been the subject of numerous controversies, from tweets that tanked Tesla stock prices to feuds with regulatory agencies. But through it all, he persisted. And now, in the courtroom, facing accusations of market manipulation and fraud, Musk would need all his resilience and ingenuity to face what was coming. But there was one thing that everyone seemed to forget. Musk didn't just have a mind for technology. He was also a master strategist, a chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. As the trial continued to unfold, Musk's legal team began to reveal how his mind worked. Behind his cool demeanor in the courtroom, there was a method to every move, and it was only a matter of time before his genius legal maneuver would shock everyone. His motivations? To protect what he'd built, of course, but also to expose a larger truth, one that could change everything. As the trial progressed, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. The prosecution, led by a team of sharp legal minds, seemed determined to paint Musk as the villain. They argued that his public statements and social media posts had caused havoc in the stock market, manipulating Tesla's stock price and deceiving investors. They pointed to the infamous tweet in 2018, where Musk claimed he had secured funding to take Tesla private at $420 a share, a statement that turned out to be false, leading to a hefty fine from the SEC. The judge, known for her stern and unrelenting approach, wasted no time in throwing sharp jabs at Musk's defense. With each passing day, her skepticism grew. She was quick to question his credibility, mocking his bold claims that he had a plan to change the world. To her, Musk was just another billionaire who thought the rules didn't apply to him. But Musk remained calm. His expression never wavered as the judge's words pierced the air. Even when his own lawyers were being cross-examined, he never showed frustration. In fact, Musk appeared almost amused, as if he were watching a game unfold, waiting for the right moment to make his move. The prosecution continued to press, introducing witness after witness, each one seemingly more damning than the last. They called financial experts who testified that Musk's statements had led to significant volatility in Tesla's stock. They brought in investors who claimed they had been misled, losing millions of dollars as a result of Musk's actions. The courtroom was beginning to feel like a war zone. Musk's reputation was on the line, and each day, it seemed more and more like he might lose this battle. The prosecution, along with the media, painted him as reckless, arrogant, and reckless with other people's money. But what the prosecution didn't know, what no one in that courtroom could have anticipated, was that Musk had been anticipating every move. Musk's legal team, comprised of some of the best attorneys in the country, had remained mostly quiet during the early stages of the trial. Their strategy was one of patience. They were playing the long game. While the prosecution tried to establish that Musk was reckless, their narrative was built on speculation. They were focused on the past, trying to paint Musk as a man who had failed to control his own words. But Musk's team knew the key to winning the trial wasn't in proving Musk had acted irrationally. It was in proving that he had always been operating within the boundaries of the law. They just needed the right moment to strike. Behind closed doors, Musk was working tirelessly with his lawyers, going over every detail of the case. Every document, every piece of evidence, and every statement had been meticulously analyzed. It was only a matter of time before they would reveal their ace. Meanwhile, the prosecution continued to ramp up the pressure. They began to target Musk's character, implying that his unorthodox behavior in the past was indicative of a larger pattern, one that suggested he was willing to break the rules to achieve his goals. They hammered away at Musk's Twitter presence, his controversial comments, and his penchant for making bold promises, many of which didn't come to fruition as quickly as he had suggested. The media couldn't get enough of the courtroom drama. Headlines screamed with accusations of fraud, market manipulation, and Musk's ever-growing persona as the mad genius of Silicon Valley. The narrative was taking on a life of its own, and it was one that painted Musk as a reckless billionaire who cared little about the consequences of his actions. But in the midst of the chaos, Musk remained steady. He knew this trial wasn't just about defending himself. It was about something much larger. His companies, his vision, and the future of sustainable technology were on the line. Musk wasn't going to let the courtroom drama distract him from his ultimate goal. He was determined to prove that what he had built wasn't a result of manipulation or fraud, but a culmination of years of hard work, innovation, and, above all, a belief that technology could save the world. But as the days passed, a deep sense of uncertainty began to settle in. The judge was clearly biased, and the prosecution's case seemed airtight. With every passing moment, it became harder to see a way out. Musk's legal team was running out of strategies, and they had yet to reveal their trump card. In the end, the question was clear. Could Musk really turn the tide of this trial? Could he find a way to show the world that he wasn't the villain the media and prosecution were making him out to be? The odds seemed stacked against him, and yet, as always, Musk had a plan. He had never been one to back down, and this time would be no different. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as the next day's proceedings approached. Everyone could feel it. A shift was coming, and Musk was ready to make his move. The following morning, the tension in the courtroom was almost palpable. Reporters lined the back of the room, microphones in hand, poised to capture every moment. Legal teams shuffled papers and whispered strategy, while Musk sat in the defendant's chair, looking as calm and collected as ever. But anyone who knew him understood that beneath that composed exterior, he was preparing for something far bigger than anyone expected. Musk's legal team had remained tight-lipped about their next move, and the prosecution was still riding high from the series of successful cross-examinations. But what no one realized was that Musk was already several steps ahead, and today, he was ready to unleash his plan. As the session began, the judge wasted no time in continuing her rigorous questioning of Musk's actions, her tone more biting than ever. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she addressed him. "Mr. Musk, you've heard the testimony. Your actions have caused significant disruptions in the market. You're playing a dangerous game with the lives and investments of ordinary people. Do you still believe you're above reproach?" Musk didn't flinch. He had anticipated this line of questioning for weeks. His response, however, would change everything. He stood up, his voice calm but full of authority. "Your Honor, I understand the concerns raised in this trial, but the accusations against me and my companies are based on a misunderstanding. I've always operated with the best interests of the public in mind. Every move I make, whether in the public eye or behind closed doors, is to further the cause of sustainability, innovation, and the advancement of human potential." The room went silent. Musk's words hung in the air, but there was something different this time. His usual confidence wasn't just a facade. There was a sense of purpose, a quiet conviction that cut through the tension in the room. He wasn't just defending himself, he was making a statement. The judge scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Is that so? And you think that's enough to excuse your behavior? What about the millions of dollars lost by investors who followed your words blindly?" Musk held up his hand, signaling for a moment of silence. "I've never asked anyone to follow me blindly. What I've asked for is trust. Trust in the potential of something greater than what we have today. Trust in a future where we move beyond fossil fuels, where we colonize Mars, and where humanity survives in the long run." The room was stunned. There was something in his voice now that was different. It wasn't just a defense, it was a plea, a call to something larger, something that transcended this courtroom, this trial, this moment. "Your Honor," Musk continued, "I'm not here to just defend myself. I'm here because I believe in the potential of the future. And if we're going to make the necessary changes in the world, we can't afford to be distracted by petty arguments. We must look beyond today and focus on tomorrow." The judge's face was unreadable, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. For the first time in this trial, the sharp edge of her mockery seemed to dull. Musk wasn't just arguing legalities anymore. He was appealing to something deeper, something that even the most hardened of judges couldn't ignore. Suddenly, Musk's lawyer, a sharp, experienced attorney named Jessica Williams, stood up. She was ready for the next phase of the plan. "Your Honor," she said, "we request that the court allow us to present a new set of evidence. It is crucial to understanding the broader context of this case." The judge raised an eyebrow. "What evidence?" Williams nodded to Musk, who motioned to his team. One of his lawyers, a tech-savvy young man named David, stood and walked over to a laptop connected to the courtroom's projector system. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. The courtroom gasped. On the screen was a series of emails, financial reports, and technical documents. But these weren't just any documents. They were from the very companies that had been accusing Musk of wrongdoing. In fact, they revealed something startling. Tesla's financial growth and technological progress had, in many cases, been underestimated or outright ignored by analysts. Moreover, There was a clear pattern of market manipulation from other actors who had been actively working against Musk's ventures, trying to drive down Tesla's stock price for their own financial gain. The prosecutor's face drained of color as the evidence rolled in, detailing how powerful hedge funds and other investors had used Musk's public persona to exploit the market. The documents suggested that Tesla's stock volatility was not entirely due to Musk's actions, but was, in part, driven by coordinated short selling and other market manipulation tactics. These revelations painted a very different picture from the one the prosecution had built. The room erupted into chaos as reporters shouted questions and attorneys scrambled to make sense of the new evidence. But the damage had been done. Musk's strategy was clear. He had not been the manipulator in this scenario. He had been the target of a coordinated attack by those who sought to discredit him and undermine his companies. Musk's calm demeanor remained unchanged, but inside, he knew the tide had turned. This was his moment, the moment he had been waiting for. His legal team had expertly played the long game, biding their time until the perfect opportunity to present the truth. The judge, visibly shaken, leaned back in her chair. For the first time in the trial, she was forced to confront a reality that she had not anticipated. Musk wasn't just some reckless billionaire. He was, in many ways, the victim of a larger conspiracy. But the trial wasn't over yet. The road ahead was still filled with obstacles. The prosecution would undoubtedly fight back, and Musk still had to prove that his actions were not just legally defensible, but morally sound. But in that moment, as the courtroom buzzed with shock and disbelief, one thing was certain. Elon Musk was not going down without a fight, and the world would soon learn that the real battle had only just begun. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The shocking revelation in the courtroom had sent ripples through the legal world, the media, and the tech industry. Musk's legal team had turned the trial on its head with the presentation of evidence that suggested a well-orchestrated campaign to undermine Tesla and Musk personally. For the first time in the trial, the prosecution seemed caught off guard, scrambling to figure out their next move. But it wasn't just the legal teams who were reacting. The media storm was in full force. Headlines were filled with phrases like, "Musk strikes back," and "a billionaire's genius move," as journalists and commentators scrambled to analyze the new twist. For many, Musk's unexpected move was seen as a masterstroke, a brilliant counterattack in a battle that had seemed lost just days before. But as the dust settled, Musk found himself facing the most difficult part of the journey, dealing with the emotional fallout. Despite the excitement and the victory in court, Musk couldn't escape the emotional weight of the situation. For all the public praise he received, he knew that the world saw him as more than just an entrepreneur. He was a symbol, an icon, someone whose every move was scrutinized under a microscope. The pressure to maintain that image, the genius, the visionary, was suffocating. As the courtroom drama continued, Musk took some quiet moments to reflect. He'd always believed in the power of technology to transform the world. He'd worked tirelessly for years, sacrificing time with his family, friends, and even his own well-being to build something that he hoped would change the course of human history. But in doing so, he had also become something else, something he wasn't always comfortable with, a public figure who was expected to always be in control, always perfect. The accusations, the ridicule, the endless attacks. It had all started to take a toll on him. Behind the scenes, Musk struggled with loneliness, with the weight of the decisions he had to make, and with the constant sense that there was always something more he needed to prove. But none of that was visible to the public. They only saw the outward brilliance, the man who seemed to have it all together, the man who could solve the world's biggest problems. As he sat alone in his office at Tesla's headquarters that evening, a rare moment of quiet away from the frenzy of the trial, Musk's mind wandered. Was he really just a genius, or was he a man who had sacrificed too much for his ambitions? Did his drive to change the world come at the cost of his own peace? The emotional weight of the trial, the accusations, and the scrutiny of his every move was beginning to wear on him. But Musk wasn't one to back down, and in that moment, he realized that his true test was not in proving his genius to the world. It was in confronting the emotional toll it had taken on him. He had always been someone who pushed himself to the limit, who never allowed failure to define him. But now, He understood that even the greatest of minds could be shaken by the emotional turmoil that came with such a relentless drive. As the days went on, Musk's internal struggle became more apparent. But in the courtroom, the focus was still on the case. The prosecution had been caught off guard, but they weren't about to give up. They would fight back, and they would do everything they could to regain control of the narrative. But Musk was ready. His legal team had been preparing for this next phase of the trial, the emotional climax. They knew that the real turning point wouldn't just be the legal evidence. It would be about the human story behind the headlines. Musk wasn't just a billionaire with a big ego. He was a man with a vision, a man who had fought against all odds to build what he believed would be a better future for humanity. And now, with the courtroom as his stage, Musk was about to lay bare the emotional truth behind his actions. He wasn't just fighting for his companies. He was fighting for his legacy. The moment of reckoning had arrived. It was time for Musk to face the world, not as a defendant in a trial, but as a man who had sacrificed everything, and who was willing to sacrifice even more for the future he believed in. The emotional climax of the trial was about to unfold. The day of the final arguments in the trial arrived. The courtroom was filled to capacity, the air heavy with anticipation. Lawyers on both sides were prepared to deliver their closing statements. But Elon Musk, whose silence had often been the sharpest tool in his arsenal, was about to say something that no one expected, something that would not only resolve the trial but challenge the very concept of what it meant to be a visionary. The courtroom had been flooded with dramatic moments, from the initial shocking presentation of evidence that revealed a coordinated effort to undermine Tesla and Musk, to his own calm and methodical defense. The prosecution had been relentless, yet despite all their attacks, they never fully addressed the core issue. Musk wasn't just a man making reckless statements for personal gain. He was a man with a vision, one that was so deeply embedded in his soul that it transcended the everyday concerns of market fluctuations, stock prices, and legal scrutiny. As the judge called for the final arguments, Musk stood. His team had worked tirelessly to frame the narrative, but now it was his turn to speak. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court," Musk began, his voice measured but resonant. The courtroom fell silent as he continued. "This trial, and the events leading up to it, have been about far more than me. It's been about something bigger, something that stretches beyond the confines of this room. It's been about the future of clean energy, the future of space exploration, and the future of humanity itself. I didn't start Tesla, or SpaceX, or any of my companies to make a fortune. I started them because I believe in what we can achieve together as a species." His words were powerful, not just because they came from a billionaire with a massive fortune, but because they came from a man who had built everything from scratch, often against the odds. Musk's voice grew more impassioned as he spoke of the sacrifices he had made, of the battles he had fought, not just with competitors or governments, but within himself. "I have made mistakes," he admitted, his voice steady. "I've said things in the past that I regret. But every decision I've made, every tweet, every announcement, they were made with the belief that we, as a society, need to change the way we think about energy, transportation, and the future of our planet. We need to stop focusing on the problems of today and start solving the challenges of tomorrow." The prosecution shifted uncomfortably, but Musk wasn't done. He turned to the judge, his eyes locking with hers, as if looking for something more than just legal resolution. "I stand before you today, not as a man who is above the law, but as a man who is fighting for the future, fighting for the generations to come. I've never asked for the world's approval. I've only asked for the chance to make a difference." The courtroom was silent. The judge, who had been so firm in her questioning, appeared to be reflecting on Musk's words. It was clear now. This trial was no longer just about stock manipulation or legal definitions. It had become a battle over the very essence of what it means to be a visionary in today's world. And then, in a move that surprised everyone, Musk paused. His words were not meant to justify his past actions, but to ask for understanding of his vision. And in doing so, he had created a profound emotional connection with the court, something that no amount of legal arguments could have achieved. The judge leaned forward, breaking the silence. Her voice, once stern and skeptical, now seemed softened. "Mr. Musk," she said, This court has heard a great deal about your actions, your intentions, and your companies. But what I'm hearing today is something different. You're asking for more than a verdict. You're asking for the future to be understood. And that, I think, changes things." The prosecution attempted to interject, but the judge waved them off, signaling that it was time for her to deliberate. The room waited as she pondered the statements made, not just in the legal arguments, but in the raw honesty Musk had shown in his closing speech. Hours passed before the final verdict was delivered, but when it came, it was nothing short of remarkable. After careful consideration of the facts, the testimony, and the emotional weight of this trial, the judge began. "This court finds that Mr. Elon Musk's actions were not driven by malice or intent to deceive, but rather by a relentless drive to innovate and create. While some of his actions were, at times, ill-advised, the court recognizes that his vision for the future has had a significant impact on technology and society. Therefore, the charges against Mr. Musk are dismissed." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of disbelief and applause. Musk's legal team stood in stunned silence before breaking into applause, but Musk himself remained still, processing what had just happened. The relief was palpable, but it wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about something more profound. The recognition of his work, his vision, and the truth that sometimes, to change the world, you have to push boundaries, even when the world doesn't understand. As Musk walked out of the courtroom, reporters crowded around him, eager for a soundbite, for a statement, for the next chapter of his story. But Musk simply smiled. "I don't need to talk about the victory," he said calmly. "I've said what I needed to say. Now, let's get back to work. The future doesn't wait." And with that, he turned and walked toward his next challenge. The trial had ended, but Musk's journey was far from over. The world buzzed with excitement as the dust began to settle after the trial. Elon Musk's victory was more than just a legal triumph. It was a statement, a bold declaration that visionaries like him would not be silenced, regardless of the challenges or the legal battles they might face. The media quickly shifted its tone, going from skepticism to admiration. Headlines now read, "Elon Musk's legal victory. The genius who defied the odds, and how Musk's vision for the future just won in court." For Musk, however, the victory was bittersweet. As much as he appreciated the validation, he was already thinking about what came next. The trial had taken up months of his time, leaving him with little room to focus on his companies, his projects, and his long-term goals. He was ready to move on, to dive back into the work that had driven him for so many years. But this time, there was something different in the air, something that had changed him at his core. For all his ambition and brilliance, Musk had never fully acknowledged the toll his journey had taken on his personal life. He had sacrificed friendships, relationships, and his own health in pursuit of his dreams. But after the trial, something inside him shifted. The realization that he wasn't just fighting for technological advancement, but for the very future of humanity, had sparked a newfound sense of responsibility. Musk stood in the Tesla factory, surrounded by engineers, designers, and innovators working tirelessly to bring his vision to life. His mind was sharp, focused on the next steps, but his heart had a quiet longing for something more. He knew that in order to truly lead, he had to change how he viewed success, not just in terms of business growth or market dominance, but in the context of human connection and well-being. As he walked through the production lines, Musk couldn't help but notice the passion in the eyes of the people around him. The Tesla team wasn't just building electric cars, they were building the future. They were working toward a cleaner, more sustainable world. But Musk realized that if he was to lead them into the future, he needed to inspire not just with his ideas but with his actions. He called a meeting with his leadership team later that day. "We've accomplished a lot," Musk began, his voice steady but thoughtful. "But we're just getting started. We've been focusing on the technology, and that's crucial. But we can't forget the people who are driving this change. I've been so focused on building the future that I've lost sight of the importance of the present. We have to take care of each other. Our success isn't just about the cars we make or the rockets we send into space. It's about how we lift each other up along the way." There was a moment of silence in the room as his team absorbed the weight of his words. Musk wasn't just a visionary with a relentless drive to achieve. He was now speaking with the understanding of a leader who recognized the need for balance. The world may have seen him as a genius, but the truth was that his success came with its own set of challenges, and those challenges weren't always about technology. Sometimes they were about understanding people, about leadership that transcended the boardroom. As the meeting concluded, Musk found himself alone in his office, looking out over the sprawling factory grounds. The hum of innovation surrounded him, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. The trial had forced him to reflect on his purpose, his legacy, and his role in the world. And now, he was ready to move forward, not just with new projects, but with a deeper sense of understanding about the true cost of ambition. The next few months saw a shift in Musk's approach to leadership. He became more present with his teams, more open about his struggles and his vision for the future. His companies flourished, not just because of the groundbreaking innovations they produced, but because the people behind those innovations felt seen and heard. Musk's transformation was subtle but powerful. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about creating a culture of collaboration, empathy, and shared purpose. As the years passed, Musk continued to break boundaries with Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and his other ventures. But this time, the world saw a different side of him. He wasn't just the genius with a grand vision. He was the man who had learned to embrace his humanity, his imperfections, and the importance of those around him. His legacy was no longer defined solely by the electric cars or the rockets that soared into space. It was defined by the people who followed him, who believed in his dream and were willing to work together to make it a reality. The media, once quick to criticize and mock him, now began to write stories of inspiration. Stories of how Musk had not only revolutionized industries, but had also changed the way the world viewed leadership. His story became a testament to the power of resilience, innovation, and most importantly, the ability to learn and grow. Musk's legal victory, though a significant moment in his journey, was just one chapter in a much larger story, a story that was still unfolding. It was a story of a man who had defied the odds, not just to change the world, but to become the kind of leader who could inspire others to do the same. And as Musk looked out at the stars, at the rockets ready to launch and the electric vehicles cruising down the roads, he knew one thing for certain. The real journey had only just begun. Months after the trial, the legal victory faded into the background as Elon Musk's focus shifted back to the space frontier. SpaceX, his beloved aerospace company, had been Musk's passion long before Tesla or any of his other ventures. He had always believed that the future of humanity depended on space exploration, colonizing Mars, creating a backup for civilization, and pushing the boundaries of what humans were capable of. This was his ultimate mission. But the landscape of space exploration was changing. Governments around the world had been ramping up their efforts, and private companies were now key players in what had once been a strictly governmental domain. Musk had always been ahead of the curve, but now he was faced with the reality that the competition was growing fiercer by the day. Musk sat in his office at SpaceX headquarters, looking over the latest design plans for the Starship, a spacecraft that was intended to carry humans to Mars. His team had been working relentlessly, but there was a sense of urgency in the air now. The longer they waited, the more they risked losing their edge to other companies, not to mention the governments that were becoming more involved in space exploration. The pressure was mounting, but Musk, as always, thrived in the face of adversity. His obsession with progress drove him to push beyond what most would consider reasonable, but that same drive had brought SpaceX to where it was today. The company had launched countless satellites, resupplied the International Space Station, and even made history by sending astronauts to space on privately developed spacecraft. But the real goal, Mars, was still a long way off. A knock on the door broke his concentration. It was Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and chief operating officer, one of the most trusted people in Musk's circle. "Elon," she said, walking in with a stack of reports, "we need to talk about the upcoming Starship test flights. I know you've been pushing for an aggressive timeline, but we need to make sure we don't sacrifice safety for speed." Musk leaned back in his chair, staring at the plans for Starship on the screen in front of him. The looming deadlines for Mars missions hung over him like an ever-present cloud, but he knew that there was no shortcut to success. "I get it, Gwynne," Musk replied, rubbing his temples, "but the clock is ticking. We need to go faster. Every day that passes is a day we fall behind. We have to prove to the world that this can be done, that we can make Mars a reality." Shotwell paused, her expression softening. She had seen Musk go through this cycle before. The obsessive focus, the relentless drive, the single-minded pursuit of his goals. She admired his vision, but she also knew how dangerous it could be to ignore the risks. Space exploration was no small feat, and the stakes were higher than ever. "I agree that we need to move quickly," she said, her voice steady. "But we also need to remember that we can't afford to have a disaster on our hands. The world is watching us. We've come so far, but one misstep could undo everything." Musk nodded, the weight of Shotwell's words sinking in. He had always been willing to take risks, sometimes calculated, sometimes reckless, but he had always believed that great things came from great challenges. Still, he knew that SpaceX's success hinged on trust. Trust from the public, from NASA, from investors. They needed to see that the company was not only capable of pushing the boundaries of technology, but also able to do so safely and responsibly. "We'll do it right," Musk finally said. "But we'll do it fast. I'll be in the control room for the next test. We need to make sure everything's lined up." Shotwell smiled slightly, relieved that Musk was willing to listen. "I'll get the team to make the adjustments. We'll keep pushing forward, but with caution." As she left the room, Musk couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision. Every step he took from here on out had the potential to change the course of human history. Colonizing Mars was no longer just a dream. It was a race against time. But this time, Musk's vision for the future was grounded in more than just his own ambitions. The emotional growth he had experienced over the past months, the lessons learned from the trial, the realization that his work was about more than just personal success, had shifted his perspective. He wasn't just pushing forward for the sake of progress. He was pushing forward for something greater, something that would outlast him and his companies. Musk stood up, walking to the large windows overlooking the SpaceX campus. The rockets were lined up on the launch pad, their metal surfaces gleaming under the sun. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Everything seemed to be in place, but deep down, he knew that the true test of his vision was still ahead. SpaceX was about to launch its most ambitious mission yet, and Musk was more determined than ever to make it a success. But as he stared at the rockets in front of him, he felt a surge of gratitude. The world was watching, yes, but he wasn't alone anymore. He had built a team that believed in the dream, and together, they would push the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. The race to Mars was no longer just a competition. It was a calling, and Elon Musk was ready to answer. With the launch of Starship's next test flight only weeks away, the pressure at SpaceX had reached a fever pitch. Engineers, designers, and scientists were all working around the clock to perfect every detail of the spacecraft. Elon Musk knew that this test flight wasn't just another step in SpaceX's journey. It was the moment that would determine whether or not their vision for Mars was possible. Musk had always operated with the belief that failure was not a setback but a learning opportunity. He had faced failure many times in his career, from early financial struggles with Tesla to rockets that exploded in mid-flight. But every time, he had pushed forward, learning from the mistakes and refining his methods. Now, the stakes were higher than ever before. The world was watching closely, and this test flight would either validate SpaceX's ambitions or send them back to the drawing board. Musk had been more hands-on than usual in the weeks leading up to the flight. He spent long hours in the control room, reviewing the data and meeting with the engineers to ensure every possible scenario had been accounted for. He wasn't alone in his focus. Gwynne Shotwell, who had become Musk's right hand at SpaceX, was also fully invested in the mission, balancing her pragmatic approach with Musk's unrelenting drive. The day before the test flight, the SpaceX headquarters was buzzing with activity. The final preparations were underway, and the entire team was feeling the weight of the moment. Musk took a walk outside to clear his head, his gaze drifting to the launch pad in the distance, where Starship was positioned, ready for liftoff. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air on his face. For all the progress he had made, for all the billions of dollars invested, for all the technological advancements, he realized there was still so much uncertainty ahead. The truth was, no matter how many tests they ran, no matter how precise the engineering, space exploration remained unpredictable. He thought back to the early days of SpaceX, when no one believed in his vision. The idea that a private company could compete with NASA and other space giants was seen as a pipe dream. But Musk had fought through the skepticism and the failures. He'd spent years proving people wrong, and now, with this upcoming flight, SpaceX was at the precipice of something monumental. Musk's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from one of his engineers, updating him on the status of the test. He looked at the message and then put the phone away. There was no need to check every small update. He had complete faith in his team. As night fell, Musk sat in his office at SpaceX, the soft hum of computers and machinery in the background. The entire building seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the morning. Tomorrow would decide so much. The future of SpaceX, the future of Mars exploration, and perhaps even the future of humanity's relationship with the stars. Gwen entered the office and sat down across from Musk. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but carrying the weight of the unspoken pressure. Musk gave her a tight smile, though his eyes betrayed the uncertainty that even he couldn't shake. "Yeah, I'm good. Just, tomorrow's a big day." "I know," Shotwell said, leaning back in her chair. "But remember, no matter what happens tomorrow, we've already accomplished a lot. We've got a lot to be proud of, and we'll keep moving forward. The vision won't change." Musk nodded, appreciating her words, though they didn't fully ease the weight on his shoulders. His mind raced through countless scenarios, from a perfect launch to another failed attempt. But deep down, he knew that regardless of the outcome, this was just one part of the journey. "We're going to make history tomorrow," Musk said, more to himself than to Shotwell. His voice was quieter now, filled with the gravity of the moment. The next morning, the entire SpaceX campus was alive with energy. Engineers were finalizing checks, and the media began to gather, ready to report on the day's events. Musk stood in front of the control room monitors, his team by his side, as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The voice of the announcer echoed through the speakers. The numbers ticked down, each one inching them closer to the moment that could change everything. Musk's heart raced as he watched the numbers. He felt a surge of emotion, excitement, fear, hope. Space exploration was a gamble, and Musk had always been willing to take the risks. But in this moment, as the countdown continued, he couldn't help but think of all the people who had put their faith in him. He thought about the families of his team members, the investors, the engineers, and the future generations who would one day look back at this moment as a turning point in human history. 3, 2, 1. The roar of the engines filled the air as the Starship launched into the sky. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the massive rocket soared upward. But then, just as quickly, the rocket veered off course, sending a wave of tension through the control room. "Abort!" a voice shouted. "Abort, abort!" The room erupted into chaos. Musk's heart sank as he watched the rocket on the monitors, knowing that it wasn't going as planned. The spacecraft began to tumble through the air, and just moments later, there was a blinding flash as it exploded mid-flight. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The gravity of the situation hit Musk harder than he expected. His stomach twisted with a mix of disbelief and regret, but quickly, his mind snapped into action. This wasn't the end. This was just another failure, a setback that could be turned into another lesson. Musk stood in front of the control room, taking a deep breath. "We'll fix this," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "We'll learn from this, and we'll try again. This is only the beginning." And with that, the countdown to the next launch began. The explosion of Starship was a moment that rattled even the most seasoned members of the SpaceX team. The sudden flash of fire and smoke had been devastating, and for a moment, doubt lingered in the air. In a world that demanded perfection, this failure seemed monumental. Yet, as the dust settled in the control room, there was no panic, only an unwavering determination. Elon Musk, standing in the heart of the SpaceX Operations Center, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The room was silent, each member of the team processing the catastrophic event in their own way. But Musk, true to form, refused to let this setback define them. Space exploration was always about pushing the boundaries, and to push boundaries meant facing risks, sometimes even failures. He had experienced it before, many times over, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now. The world was watching. Musk's first instinct was to speak, to rally the team and remind them of why they were doing this in the first place. "Everyone, listen up," Musk said, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is part of the process. We're going to figure out what went wrong, fix it, and get back in the air. It's not the end of the journey. It's just a bump in the road." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the engineers around him. He could see the fatigue, the disappointment, but he also saw a flicker of something else: resilience. This was a team that had been through the fires before, and they weren't about to let one failure derail them. "We've learned something today," Musk continued, "and that's what matters. We will rebuild. We will come back stronger. Mars isn't going anywhere." The engineers nodded, their resolve strengthening with Musk's words. They had always believed in his vision, and now, more than ever, they were willing to do whatever it took to make that vision a reality. The lessons learned from the failure would fuel their drive to improve and innovate. Space exploration was never going to be easy, but Musk had always known that nothing worth achieving ever was. Musk turned to Gwynne Shotwell, who had been silently watching the scene unfold. She met his gaze, and without needing to say a word, they both understood the gravity of what needed to be done next. "Gwynne," Musk said, his tone shifting to something more tactical, "we need to get the team to dissect everything. I want every detail of this launch analyzed. Let's start with the engine failure and work our way through everything else. Get me a report on my desk by tomorrow morning. No excuses." Shotwell gave a nod of agreement, already stepping into action. "I'll make it happen, Elon." As the team scattered to work, Musk felt an unexpected sense of calm wash over him. He had seen failure before, but this time, it didn't feel like defeat. Instead, it felt like an opportunity to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. It was a reminder that the road to Mars wasn't going to be a straight path, and that resilience was just as important as innovation. This setback would not define them. It was simply a part of the journey. That night, as Musk sat alone in his office, going through the initial reports from the failed test flight, he reflected on how far SpaceX had come. It had taken years of painstaking work to get to this point. The first few rockets had been far from perfect. Many had failed, but each failure had brought them closer to success. Each failure had taught them something valuable. Musk knew that they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. The next test flight would need to be flawless, and the team would need to be more focused than ever before. But as he looked out of his office window, watching the night sky and the flickering lights of the SpaceX campus, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The mission to Mars was a colossal task, one that would require not only cutting-edge technology but a team that could weather the inevitable storms along the way. In that moment, Musk made a vow to himself. He would not let the weight of failure hold them back. Instead, he would use it as fuel to drive forward, to push his team and his company to new heights. The world had watched as SpaceX defied the odds before, and they would watch again. The next morning, the team came together in the control room, ready to begin the investigation into what went wrong. As engineers and scientists combed through the data, identifying the root cause of the failure, Musk stood off to the side, quietly observing. He wasn't there to micromanage. He was there to listen, to understand, and to lead. SpaceX wasn't just a company built on technological innovation. It was built on people who believed in the impossible and were willing to fail time and time again, until they succeeded. Days passed, and slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle began to come together. The engine failure had been traced back to a minor flaw in the fuel system, which, in combination with extreme heat during takeoff, had led to the explosion. It wasn't a catastrophic failure in design. It was an issue that could be fixed, and the team was already working on the solution. Musk, as he always did, focused on the big picture. They would make the necessary adjustments, and then they would launch again. No delays. No excuses. They were on a mission, and the future of humanity was at stake. As the team prepped for the next test flight, Musk had an idea. This time, they would not only work on the technical aspects of the Starship, but also on the public narrative. SpaceX was more than just a private space company. It was a symbol of resilience, of human perseverance. And Musk knew that to inspire others, they had to share not only their successes but their struggles, their failures, and the lessons they learned along the way. He reached out to the communications team. "I want a live stream of the next launch. We're going to show the world what it takes to reach the stars. They need to see the process, the setbacks and the triumphs. This is bigger than just a company. It's about the future of humanity." And so, the countdown began once more. But this time, the team was more united than ever. They knew the path ahead would not be easy, but they also knew that failure wasn't the end. It was just a step in the process. And with every step, they were getting closer to Mars. After weeks of hard work and tireless dedication, the time had come for the next test flight. SpaceX's engineering team had made the necessary adjustments to the Starship, correcting the issues with the fuel system that had caused the previous explosion. Elon Musk, however, knew that this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The failure had made headlines around the world, and now, SpaceX needed to prove that they could bounce back, stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever. As the team readied Starship for launch, Musk made a decision that would change the way the world viewed space exploration. For the first time, SpaceX would live stream the entire process, from pre-launch checks to the moment the rocket launched into space. He wanted the world to see the effort, the failures, the risks, and the triumphs, because to him, that was the essence of the journey. Space exploration wasn't just about the end result. It was about the process, the constant push toward progress, and the willingness to fail in order to succeed. The decision wasn't without its risks. The media had already been quick to report on the previous failure, and Musk knew that the live stream could go horribly wrong if the test flight ended in another disaster. But the potential reward was worth the risk. SpaceX was already on the cutting edge, but by opening up the process to the world, Musk hoped to inspire a new generation of engineers, scientists, and dreamers. As the launch date approached, SpaceX's social media accounts began to buzz with anticipation. The live stream was announced, and thousands of people across the world began marking their calendars, eager to witness history in the making. Musk, as always, remained focused on the task at hand. There was no time for distractions. The rocket had to fly, and it had to succeed. On the day of the test flight, the atmosphere at SpaceX headquarters was electric. The entire campus was filled with a mixture of nervous energy and determination. Engineers, technicians, and support staff moved with purpose, checking systems and making final adjustments. Musk stood by the launch pad, overseeing the final stages of preparation, his eyes fixed on the gleaming Starship. Gwynne Shotwell walked over to him, clipboard in hand. "All systems are go," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the moment. "We're ready when you are." Musk nodded, his mind sharp despite the pressure. "Let's do it. Keep me posted on any changes." As Shotwell moved off to coordinate with the control room, Musk took a deep breath. For all his confidence, there was a small voice of doubt in his head. What if something went wrong again? What if they failed in front of the entire world? But then he pushed those thoughts aside. He had long ago accepted that failure was part of the journey. It was the pursuit of greatness that mattered, not the occasional setbacks. The countdown began, and the world held its breath. 10, 9, 8. The voice of the announcer rang out, filling the airwaves. Musk's heart pounded in his chest as the numbers ticked down. His thoughts raced, but he remained focused on the task at hand. This was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and belief. In this moment, he wasn't just trying to prove something to the world. He was proving it to himself, that all the late nights, the failures, the endless questioning had been worth it. 3, 2, 1. The ground trembled as the engines roared to life. The launch was flawless. Starship soared into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke and fire behind it. Musk's breath caught in his throat as he watched the rocket climb higher and higher, gaining speed and altitude with each passing second. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The live stream cameras captured every angle, every twist and turn as Starship soared above the clouds. The control room erupted in cheers as the rocket entered its initial phase of flight, but Musk remained steady, his eyes fixed on the monitors, making sure everything was going according to plan. As the rocket reached the upper atmosphere, the next critical stage approached. The fuel tanks had to separate in perfect synchronization, or the mission would fail. The engineers in the control room held their collective breath as the moment arrived. Then, with a smooth and precise movement, the tanks separated, and the spacecraft continued its journey through space. The tension in the room eased as the mission entered the final stages. Musk allowed himself a small smile, but there was no time to celebrate just yet. The final test was the return phase, the landing. Starship needed to touch down on the landing pad safely to complete the mission. The rocket's descent was flawless, guided by the onboard thrusters that adjusted its position in real time. As the rocket approached the landing site, the room held its breath once again. Landing in T-minus 30 seconds, the announcer said. Musk's eyes were glued to the screen, his mind focused solely on the task ahead. Every detail had to align perfectly. One small miscalculation, one misstep, and it could all end in disaster. The rocket's landing gear deployed, and with a controlled descent, Starship touched down with a soft thud on the launch pad. The room erupted into applause, the engineers cheering, hugging, and congratulating each other. SpaceX had done it. They had successfully launched, completed the mission, and landed Starship back on Earth. It was a moment of triumph, but Musk knew that this was just the beginning. The live stream continued, and Musk spoke directly to the camera, his voice calm and resolute. This is just the first step. We've learned a lot, and we'll keep pushing the boundaries. Mars is closer than ever, and SpaceX is more determined than ever to make that dream a reality. As the team celebrated in the background, Musk took a moment to reflect on the journey. The road had been long, and there had been many obstacles along the way. But now, standing at the threshold of space exploration, he felt a deep sense of pride. They had proven that they could overcome failure, that they could adapt and innovate in the face of adversity. This wasn't just about rockets or space missions. It was about something much bigger. It was about proving to the world that humanity was capable of achieving the impossible, of reaching for the stars and never looking back. The live stream continued to broadcast the team's celebration, but in that moment, Musk knew that the real work had just begun. The road to Mars would be long and difficult, but SpaceX had proven that they had the resilience to succeed. And as he watched the team celebrate, he couldn't help but think the next test would be even bigger. But they were ready. What do you think it takes to achieve the impossible? Share your thoughts and inspire the next generation of dreamers and innovators in the comments below. The success of the Starship test flight reverberated across the globe. News outlets, social media platforms, and tech blogs were flooded with headlines and discussions about SpaceX's groundbreaking achievement. For Elon Musk, it was a moment of validation, a moment that proved the critics wrong. Once again, the live stream of the launch had not only shown the world SpaceX's capabilities, but also the company's resilience. But as much as Musk allowed himself to take a brief pause in celebration, he knew that this success was just a stepping stone. The real challenge lay ahead. The eyes of the world were now on him, and Musk understood that expectations were higher than ever before. The public and private sectors alike were eager to see how SpaceX would follow up on its success and what Musk's next move would be. This wasn't just about proving that Starship could fly. This was about proving that humanity was ready for the next great leap in space exploration. Musk wasn't just aiming to reach the moon or Mars. He wanted to change the course of human history. The day after the successful test flight, Musk convened a meeting with his senior leadership team. The atmosphere in the conference room was focused, with a sense of urgency in the air. The accomplishment was behind them, but the future loomed large. Gwynne Shotwell spoke first, her voice steady. We've seen an incredible amount of press and interest from investors. The world is watching us now. We can't afford to slow down. We need to keep the momentum going. Musk nodded, leaning forward. Exactly. But we also need to make sure we're ready for the next phase. We can't just jump into the next launch without addressing everything we've learned. We need to double down on research and development, especially when it comes to life support systems and interplanetary travel. Starship is capable, but we need to make sure it can handle the long-haul journey to Mars. Shotwell glanced at the engineers in the room, who all nodded in agreement. There was a lot more work to be done before SpaceX could begin any real Mars missions. This wasn't just about getting a rocket into space. It was about building the technology and systems necessary for sustainable living on another planet. The stakes were higher than ever. Elon smiled, but it wasn't a smile of contentment. It was a smile of determination. We're not just looking at the next flight, or even the next year. This is about the future of humanity. We need to be thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the road. We need to be building an ecosystem for life on Mars. Not just a rocket, not just a landing pad, but a whole new world. He stood up and began to pace, clearly energized by his vision. I want our engineers working on a permanent Mars habitat. We need to begin the development of life support systems that will allow humans to live, work, and survive on Mars for extended periods. We can't just land and leave. We need to build a self-sustaining colony. The team absorbed Musk's words. While many of them were used to his ambitious goals, the challenge of creating a new world was still daunting. But it was a challenge they were willing to take on. Shotwell raised an eyebrow. And the timeline? How fast do you want us to move? Musk stopped pacing and turned to her. As fast as possible. We're on the clock. We have to accelerate everything, from propulsion technology to life support to radiation shielding. We need to keep pushing the limits of what's possible. If we wait too long, someone else will get there first, and I refuse to let that happen. Mars is ours for the taking, but we need to act now. There was a long silence in the room. Everyone in the room knew what Musk was capable of. His track record with Tesla, SpaceX, and other ventures was proof of his ability to turn the impossible into reality. But building a human settlement on Mars? It was a monumental task, one that would require every ounce of their skill, creativity, and determination. We'll get it done, Shotwell said after a pause, her voice resolute. Let's get to work. As the meeting ended, Musk felt a renewed sense of purpose. SpaceX had achieved something extraordinary, but the journey had only just begun. The path to Mars was not just about technical challenges. It was about changing the way humans viewed their place in the universe. Musk knew that the future of humanity was tied to the stars, and it was his mission to make that future a reality. The following weeks were filled with intense activity. SpaceX's engineers worked around the clock, refining Starship's design and pushing the limits of rocket science. The team began developing the next phase of the mission, a crewed test flight to the Moon, and then, eventually, Mars. Musk was no longer just the visionary leader. He was hands-on in the day-to-day decisions, reviewing every bit of data, giving feedback on designs, and meeting with experts in fields ranging from environmental science to medicine to ensure that the systems they were building could withstand the harsh conditions of space. At the same time, the public was growing increasingly excited about the possibilities SpaceX had opened up. Musk's dream of making humanity a multi-planetary species was no longer some distant, far-fetched fantasy. It was becoming tangible. The media, investors, and even everyday people were beginning to rally behind SpaceX's mission, a mission that felt bigger than anything else in the world. But with that excitement came pressure. The success of the Starship test flight had set the bar high, and the world was watching closely. If the next mission failed, it would be a massive blow not only to SpaceX but to the idea of humanity's future in space. Musk, however, was undeterred. He had always known that success didn't come without risk. But risk, he believed, was the key to pushing humanity forward. Space exploration wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about learning from it, adapting, and continuing to evolve. As SpaceX prepared for its next mission, Musk stood outside the launch facility one evening, looking up at the stars. The lights of the base flickered in the distance, but his eyes were fixed on something far beyond. Mars, a dream he had chased for years, now within reach. He could see it so clearly in his mind. The first humans walking on the surface, setting up the first colony. He could feel the weight of history pressing on him. This wasn't just about SpaceX. This was about securing the future of the human race. "We'll get there," he whispered to himself. "We will." The day that SpaceX had been working toward for years had finally arrived. The crewed test flight to the Moon was on the horizon, and with it, the stakes were higher than ever. For Elon Musk, this was more than just another mission. It was the culmination of everything SpaceX had worked for. The success of the Starship's test flight had set the stage, but this next mission was a true test of their ability to take humans into space and bring them back safely. In the months leading up to the launch, SpaceX had been working tirelessly on Starship's crewed version, refining the life support systems, the shielding, and all the technology that would ensure the astronauts' survival in space. Musk had pushed for every detail to be as perfect as possible. This wasn't just a test flight, it was a statement. SpaceX was ready to send humans beyond Earth's orbit. The crew had been carefully selected. There was Sarah Matthews, a seasoned astronaut with years of experience on the International Space Station. Then there was Tom Harris, a SpaceX engineer who had been with the company from the very beginning and had the kind of technical expertise Musk trusted implicitly. The final member of the crew was Elena Rodriguez, a medical doctor with expertise in space medicine. Together, they would be the first humans to travel aboard Starship and push the boundaries of space exploration. The morning of the launch, the energy at SpaceX headquarters was palpable. The countdown had begun, and every member of the team was deeply focused on their tasks. Musk stood in the control room, overseeing the final preparations. His gaze flickered from screen to screen, ensuring that everything was in order. But despite the tension, there was also a sense of excitement. This was history in the making. Gwynne Shotwell, standing next to him, couldn't help but smile. "This is it. We've come a long way, Elon." Musk looked at her, his expression serious but with a hint of pride. "We have. But it's not just about today. It's about the future. We're not just sending a crew to the moon. We're proving that humanity can live and thrive beyond Earth." Shotwell nodded. "I know. It's the beginning of something much bigger." As the final minutes of the countdown ticked away, Musk's thoughts drifted back to the years of hard work that had brought them to this moment. The sleepless nights, the setbacks, the failures, they had all led to this. And now, SpaceX was on the brink of changing the course of human history. He wasn't just building rockets. He was building the future. The announcer's voice echoed over the speakers. T-minus 10 minutes. All systems are go for launch. Musk's heart raced. It had been a long road, but it had all led to this. His fingers drummed lightly on the control panel in front of him as the final pre-launch checks were completed. T-minus 5 minutes, the announcer continued. He looked over at Shotwell, who gave him a nod of reassurance. The team was ready. The rocket was ready. The crew was ready. And then, the moment arrived. Launch in T-minus 30 seconds. Prepare for ignition. The world held its breath. The engines roared to life as Starship shot up into the sky, a streak of fire against the darkening blue of the Earth's atmosphere. The crowd at SpaceX's headquarters erupted into cheers as the rocket ascended, its powerful engines pushing it higher and higher. Musk stood with his arms crossed, his eyes glued to the monitor, watching as the rocket continued its ascent. But the real test would come once Starship left Earth's atmosphere. It was one thing to launch a spacecraft. It was another to keep it on course as it ventured into the vast emptiness of space. The mission was still young, and there were many steps left to go. Inside Starship, the crew was focused. Sarah Matthews sat at the helm, her hands steady on the controls. Tom Harris was monitoring the spacecraft systems, double-checking everything as they moved further away from Earth. Elena Rodriguez sat in the back, her eyes scanning the medical data from the crew's vital signs. "We're clear of the atmosphere," Sarah said, her voice calm but with a hint of excitement. "Heading toward the moon." Tom nodded, running through the systems check in his mind. "Everything's green on my end. We're good to go." Elena smiled, glancing out the window as they passed the edge of Earth's atmosphere and entered the void of space. "It's beautiful out here. Hard to believe we're really doing this." Sarah chuckled softly. "I know. It's surreal." But as the crew settled into the rhythm of the flight, the team back on Earth continued to monitor their every move. SpaceX's engineers and scientists watched the data closely, knowing that the next few hours would be critical. The crew had made it into space, but they still had to complete the rest of the journey. A successful orbit of the moon, a flyby, and a return to Earth. Any one of those stages could go wrong. Back in the control room, Musk's eyes never left the screen. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he wasn't going to let it distract him. This was the future of humanity, the next chapter in space exploration. He had long ago accepted the risks. But today, he wasn't thinking about the risks. He was thinking about the possibilities. As the crew approached the moon, the room at SpaceX fell into a tense silence. They had made it this far, but now came the moment of truth. Approaching lunar orbit, Sarah's voice came through the comms. "We're setting up for the flyby." Musk held his breath. The crew had made it into space. Now, the question was whether they could execute the flyby and return safely. The data stream showed that the spacecraft was on the right trajectory. Everything looked good, but there were still so many variables. Flyby in T-10 seconds, the announcer called out. Starship passed behind the moon, its trajectory locked in. It was one of the most critical moments of the mission. If something went wrong now, they would be too far from Earth to fix it. Flyby successful, Sarah's voice rang out. The entire room at SpaceX erupted into cheers. Musk felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it, but the mission wasn't over yet. They still had to land and return safely to Earth. Hours passed as Starship completed its loop around the moon and began its descent back toward Earth. The spacecraft's engines roared once more as it prepared for re-entry. The crew's communication was steady, and the data coming from the spacecraft was solid. The entire team at SpaceX held its breath once more as Starship began its final descent toward Earth. The landing gear deployed, and the spacecraft touched down on Earth with a soft thud. Another round of cheers erupted in the control room. The crew had returned safely, and the mission had been a resounding success. Humanity had just taken its first steps beyond Earth, and the future was looking brighter than ever. As the crew stepped out of Starship, Musk stood outside, watching the moment unfold. There were no words to describe how he felt. Pride, relief, excitement, all mixed together. SpaceX had done it. They had launched, orbited the moon, and returned home safely. But this was just the beginning. Mars was next. The success of the crewed test flight to the moon had made waves across the globe. News outlets, space enthusiasts, and even everyday people who had never before cared about space exploration were suddenly talking about it. The idea that humans had traveled beyond Earth's atmosphere, orbited the moon, and returned safely wasn't just a scientific achievement. It was a symbol of what humanity was capable of. And at the center of it all was Elon Musk, whose vision was now closer than ever to becoming reality. But while the world celebrated, Musk's mind was already focused on the next major milestone, Mars. The moon was a crucial stepping stone. It was a place to test technology, establish a base, and learn what was necessary for interplanetary living. But Mars was the true goal. Musk had always said that humanity needed to be a multiplanetary species, and now, with the success of the moon mission, it felt closer than ever. SpaceX had proven that it could transport humans beyond Earth's orbit, and now it was time to make the journey to Mars a reality. To get there, however, there was still a monumental amount of work to be done. Musk convened a special meeting with the SpaceX team to discuss their next steps. The mood in the room was different now. The success of the moon mission had energized everyone, but it had also raised the stakes. Musk's dream of sending people to Mars was no longer a distant vision. It was something that could happen in the next decade, maybe even sooner. As the team gathered in the conference room, Musk began the meeting with a statement of resolve. We've just completed one of the most important milestones in human history. But we all know that the real work is ahead of us. Mars is our future, and it's time to begin developing the systems and technology we need to make that future possible. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, spoke next. We've made enormous strides in a short period of time, but to get to Mars, we need to solve some massive challenges. The next mission won't just be about technology, it's about creating a self-sustaining colony. We need to figure out how to build a life support system that can handle the journey to Mars and the harsh conditions there. Musk nodded, his gaze focused. Exactly. Life on Mars is going to be tough. The atmosphere is thin, the weather is extreme, and the resources are limited. But we've proven that we can innovate and adapt. We need to think long-term. We need a habitat that can withstand Mars's conditions, a way to generate power, and a way to produce food, water, and oxygen. We're not just sending astronauts to Mars. We're sending the first wave of humanity's new home. There was a quiet intensity in the room as everyone absorbed Musk's words. The dream of a Mars colony was no longer a lofty aspiration. It was now a concrete, practical goal, one that would require ingenuity, determination, and perhaps even sacrifices. Musk continued, I want to see prototypes for the Mars habitat by the end of next year. We need to start working on agriculture systems, building reliable power grids, and securing sustainable water supplies. Everything we do needs to be focused on creating a thriving community. This isn't just about setting up a base. This is about making life on Mars possible for generations. The team got to work immediately, launching several new initiatives designed to tackle the key challenges. There were discussions about building solar arrays to generate power, establishing closed-loop life support systems, and working with bioengineers to develop methods of growing food in Martian soil. Musk was adamant that they had to be ready for anything. The journey to Mars would take months, and there was no room for failure once they arrived. Meanwhile, Musk's public profile continued to grow. His achievements with SpaceX, Tesla, and other ventures made him one of the most talked-about figures in the world. The media was relentless in its coverage, but Musk knew that it was all part of the plan. He was a pioneer, and he needed the world to believe in his vision if humanity was ever going to make it to Mars. But even with all the attention, Musk remained laser-focused on the task at hand. Every new breakthrough, every small step forward in the development of the Mars mission felt like a win. And with every step, he was one step closer to making the dream of a multi-planetary species a reality. The next challenge was perhaps the most daunting: figuring out how to transport a large number of people to Mars. SpaceX had Starship, but a single Starship couldn't carry everything needed for a colony. Musk knew that they would need to develop a fleet of ships to transport not only people but supplies, food, water, equipment, and tools. The engineering team worked furiously on improving Starship's design, creating variants that could carry large quantities of cargo and passengers simultaneously. Musk pushed the envelope on everything: larger engines, greater fuel efficiency, and even plans for a refueling system in orbit to ensure the ships could make the long journey. And yet, despite all the progress, Musk knew that one of the hardest parts of the Mars mission would be the human factor. Sending humans to Mars was one thing, but keeping them alive and healthy for the months-long journey was another challenge entirely. Spacecraft needed to be equipped with radiation shielding, medical supplies, and the ability to handle any number of emergencies. The team worked on developing innovative solutions, including advanced medical technologies and AI-powered systems that could monitor and respond to potential health risks. As the months passed, SpaceX made incredible strides. The engineering team continued to improve Starship's design, testing various prototypes and refining the technology needed to transport people and cargo to Mars. The life support systems, once a distant concept, were becoming a reality. They developed innovative systems for food production and water generation that could sustain astronauts on Mars. The first tests for creating artificial gravity environments were underway, and Musk was adamant that SpaceX would be ready to tackle the full range of challenges that would arise. But there were still critics. Some argued that the goal of sending people to Mars was unrealistic, that the technology wasn't advanced enough, or that the risks were simply too great. They pointed to the long history of failed space missions and the uncertain future of interplanetary travel. Musk, however, wasn't concerned with the naysayers. He had spent his career fighting against skepticism, and this was no different. His response was always the same: if you're not failing, you're not innovating. The pressure, though, was mounting. Musk knew that every failure, every misstep, would be scrutinized under a microscope. But that was part of the job. Space exploration was hard. It was dangerous. And yet, it was worth it. Getting to Mars will be the hardest thing we've ever done, Musk said during a public interview. But once we're there, we'll have done something truly extraordinary. And it will change everything, not just for SpaceX, but for humanity. As the world watched, SpaceX pushed forward with determination and purpose, inching closer to the ultimate goal of making life on Mars a reality. The dream of becoming a multi-planetary species was no longer a distant vision. It was within their grasp. The Mars mission wasn't just about rockets. It was about humanity's future. And SpaceX, with Elon Musk at the helm, was leading the charge into a new era. As the months rolled on and SpaceX continued to make progress toward its Mars mission, something shifted. The world, which had once regarded space exploration as a distant dream, began to see it as a new frontier, one that was no longer reserved for just astronauts and scientists, but for all of humanity. With each new success, the idea of becoming a multi-planetary species was less of a sci-fi fantasy and more of a tangible reality. Elon Musk, ever the visionary, had created something more than just a company. SpaceX had become a symbol of humanity's potential. People around the world began to dream of the stars in a way they hadn't in decades. The excitement was infectious, and there was a sense of urgency in the air. The first steps toward Mars had been taken, but there was still so much to do. The road to the red planet was long and uncertain, but the world was watching, waiting, and willing to take the leap. The next major hurdle on SpaceX's agenda was testing Starship's full capabilities for interplanetary travel. The engineering team had spent countless hours tweaking the design, enhancing the craft's fuel systems, life support, and radiation shielding, and pushing the envelope of what was possible in space travel. But despite the progress, there was always the looming question. What if something went wrong? It was a question that Musk always answered with confidence. Space exploration is about taking risks, and every step forward is a step toward a new future. The next test flight would push Starship to its limits, sending it on a simulated journey to Mars. This would be the first time SpaceX would attempt such an ambitious mission, and the stakes were incredibly high. If successful, it would validate many of the assumptions they had made about the spacecraft's capabilities. If not, well, they had learned to embrace failure as part of the process. The launch day arrived, and Musk stood once again in the control room, watching as the engineers prepared for the test. The countdown was underway. He could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders. This wasn't just about SpaceX. This was about humanity's future. He could already hear the buzz of excitement from the public, even though they didn't fully understand the intricacies of what they were about to witness. All they knew was that it was the next step towards something unimaginable. T-minus 5 minutes. The voice of the announcer echoed through the room. Musk's mind raced with the possibilities, but he kept his focus, scanning the monitors and watching the crew carry out their final checks. The spacecraft, Starship, stood on the launch pad, ready to soar into the sky once more. Only this time, it wouldn't just be testing Earth's atmosphere. It would be testing its journey to another planet. "Everything looks good," Gwen Shotwell said, her voice calm but intense. "We're ready for launch." Musk nodded. "Let's make history." The engines of Starship ignited with a deafening roar. The spacecraft lifted off the ground, rising into the sky. This time, it wasn't just the beauty of a rocket launch that captivated Musk. It was the idea of what it meant, a spacecraft capable of interplanetary travel, a vehicle that could one day carry humans to Mars. The Earth below quickly grew smaller, and soon, Starship was high in the atmosphere, breaking through the final layers of the planet's protective shield. Inside the control room, the tension was palpable. The team monitored every aspect of the flight, watching for signs of any malfunction or failure. With each passing moment, the spacecraft climbed higher, pushing its engines and systems to the limits. It wasn't just the trajectory they had to worry about. They were also testing the spacecraft's shielding, its ability to endure the harsh conditions of deep space. For years, SpaceX had designed Starship with this in mind, ensuring that it could withstand the radiation and vacuum of space, keep the crew safe, and make the journey without faltering. The flight would take Starship beyond Earth's orbit, mimicking a mission to Mars, where it would circle back and return to Earth safely. As Starship left Earth's atmosphere and entered deep space, the engineers back at SpaceX felt the momentous weight of what they had achieved. It wasn't just about the flight. It was about what lay ahead. They were testing more than just technology. They were testing the limits of what humanity could do in space. The craft passed the halfway point of its simulated journey, and the data began streaming back. The engines were performing as expected, the life support systems were functioning, and the radiation shields held up. There were no signs of any major issues, but the real test was still ahead. Re-entry in T-minus 30 minutes. The announcer's voice rang out. The most dangerous part of any interplanetary mission was the re-entry. Starship would need to endure the friction and heat as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere, making it one of the most critical phases of the mission. Musk and the team in the control room watched intently, holding their breath as they waited for the first signs of re-entry. If the heat shields failed or the craft wasn't properly aligned, the mission could end in disaster. But Starship performed flawlessly. The spacecraft began its descent, the heat shields glowing red as it cut through the atmosphere. The engines fired in a controlled burn, guiding the spacecraft to a perfect landing zone on Earth. The final moments were tense, but then, there it was, the soft thud of Starship touching down, its landing legs absorbing the impact with ease. The control room erupted into cheers. The test flight had been a success, a full mock-up of a journey to Mars, and Starship had passed every test. Musk stood silently, watching the live footage of the landing. There were no words needed. They had proven it. Starship was ready for the next phase. Mars was no longer a distant goal. It was within reach. Back at SpaceX headquarters, celebrations were underway. The team had successfully proven that Starship could make the journey beyond Earth and back again. It was a victory that felt like the culmination of years of hard work. But even as they celebrated, Musk was already looking ahead, planning the next steps. Mars was still out there, and there were new obstacles to overcome. The next big challenge would be the manned mission, the real mission to Mars. A journey that would not only test the spacecraft but the very survival of its crew. The technology was there, but Musk knew that they needed to do more than just send people to Mars. They needed to ensure that they could live, build, and thrive there. It was going to take decades of planning, resources, and hard work. Now, we start thinking bigger, Musk said, turning to the team. Mars is just the beginning. We've got to keep pushing the boundaries, not just for us, but for the future of humanity. As the team dispersed to prepare for the next phase, the excitement was palpable. Musk's dream of Mars was no longer a dream. It was becoming reality, one step at a time. It had been a year since the successful test flight of Starship, and the world was buzzing with anticipation. The milestone had ignited a fire of curiosity and hope, especially for those who had been following SpaceX's mission to make humanity a multiplanetary species. Now that Starship had successfully completed a simulated Mars mission, the pressure was on to move forward. SpaceX had proven it could send a spacecraft beyond Earth's atmosphere and return safely, but this was just the beginning of a much grander endeavor. Elon Musk knew that the real challenge was not just building the technology, it was preparing humanity for the most ambitious space journey in history, the first manned mission to Mars. The planning for this mission would be unlike any other. Not only would SpaceX need to transport astronauts across the vast, inhospitable void of space, but it would need to equip them with everything they needed to survive on Mars, a planet with an atmosphere so thin and an environment so hostile that even the most advanced human technology would face a steep challenge. Musk had always been a believer in the impossible, but even he understood the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The Mars mission wasn't just a space trip, it was humanity's next giant leap. Musk's mind was constantly racing. Every detail of the mission had to be meticulously planned. The spacecraft would need to be capable of carrying not only humans but all the necessary supplies: food, water, fuel, and equipment. It wasn't just a matter of getting to Mars, it was about building a sustainable presence there. Musk envisioned a future where Mars wasn't just a one-off visit but the start of a thriving colony, where humans could live, work, and grow, away from Earth's constraints. For months, Musk and his team had worked around the clock, refining Starship, improving life support systems, and ensuring that the spacecraft could endure the long journey to Mars, a journey that would take approximately 6 to 9 months each way. The team also worked on developing systems to generate energy, water, and oxygen on Mars, using the planet's resources rather than relying on Earth. But even with all the progress, Musk knew there was a long way to go. The first mission would have to be perfect. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. Everything had to be ready: the spacecraft, the crew, the equipment, and the systems that would support life on Mars. The pressure was mounting, but Musk's resolve never wavered. As the launch date neared, Musk sat down with his top engineers and mission planners at SpaceX headquarters. He looked around the room, sensing both the weight of the task ahead and the excitement in the air. This was a moment that would define not only SpaceX but the entire future of human civilization. "We've been working toward this moment for a long time," Musk said, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "Mars isn't just a place. It's a new beginning. This mission is the first step toward making humanity a multiplanetary species. It's the foundation of a future where humanity can survive beyond Earth. And it's not going to be easy. We've got one chance to get this right." The room was silent, every member of the team listening intently, knowing how high the stakes were. Musk continued, "We've built Starship to withstand the rigors of space travel, but Mars is unlike anything we've encountered before. We need to make sure everything is perfect. The landing will be difficult. We need to ensure the crew can survive and thrive once they land. It's going to take all of us working together to make this a success." The engineers and planners nodded in agreement. There was no turning back now. The mission to Mars wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a reality that was quickly becoming more tangible with every passing day. But with that reality came immense responsibility. In the months leading up to the mission, SpaceX worked tirelessly to prepare the crew. The astronauts selected for the Mars mission were some of the most elite and well-trained in the world. They were tested, trained, and prepared for every scenario, from emergencies during the launch to surviving on Mars's surface. Their physical and mental health had to be impeccable. The journey to Mars would test them in ways no human had ever been tested before, and the rigorous training was designed to ensure they were ready for whatever the mission threw at them. Elon Musk personally oversaw many aspects of the mission's development. He was hands-on in everything, from ensuring the spacecraft's readiness to working on the final details of the Mars habitat. He wanted the astronauts to succeed, but he also knew that the success of this mission would have to go beyond the crew alone. Mars needed to become a sustainable environment. That meant creating an infrastructure, habitats, greenhouses, power plants, and testing them for reliability under the most extreme conditions. The ultimate goal wasn't just a quick trip to Mars, it was a permanent presence. As the final preparations unfolded, the day of the mission arrived. Starship stood on the launch pad, ready to embark on humanity's greatest journey yet. Cameras from around the world were focused on the spacecraft, capturing the moment of liftoff. Millions of people were watching, hoping, and dreaming. Elon Musk stood at the front of the control room, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. His heart raced as the countdown clock ticked down to 0. This moment had been years in the making, but it still felt unreal. The excitement was palpable. This was it, the launch of the first manned mission to Mars. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. The engines roared to life, and Starship soared into the sky, climbing higher and higher, breaking through the atmosphere as it sped toward the stars. The world watched as the spacecraft ascended, a symbol of humanity's limitless potential. The mission was underway, and there was no turning back. But even as the launch was celebrated around the globe, Musk couldn't stop thinking about what lay ahead. The astronauts would have to endure months in space, battling isolation, the physical toll of zero gravity, and the psychological strain of the long journey. But once they reached Mars, the real work would begin. They wouldn't be landing on a planet ready to support human life. They'd be landing in a barren wasteland, a planet that offered nothing but extreme temperatures, violent dust storms, and a lack of breathable air. This was no small feat. This wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about surviving and building a future there. "We've just taken the first step," Musk said, as he watched the launch footage. "The real work starts now." The journey to Mars was officially underway. SpaceX's Starship had launched successfully, carrying a crew of astronauts on a mission that would change the course of human history. The spacecraft was now speeding through space, and Elon Musk and the entire SpaceX team were holding their breath. The world was watching, waiting for the next giant leap. For the astronauts aboard, the vast expanse of space was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The reality of being far from Earth, surrounded by the cold, unforgiving void, began to settle in. The crew had undergone extensive training, but nothing could fully prepare them for the isolation and challenges of the journey ahead. As Starship made its way toward Mars, the astronauts settled into their routine. Days turned into weeks, and the months seemed to stretch on. Life in the spacecraft was a series of small, repetitive tasks. Monitoring systems, maintaining equipment, exercising to combat the effects of zero gravity, and staying mentally sharp. The isolation began to take its toll, as the crew faced not only the physical challenges of space travel, but also the psychological strain of being so far from home. Astronaut Jane, one of the mission's commanders, was the first to break the silence one evening. "I never thought I'd get used to the idea of being this far from Earth," she said, her voice tinged with both awe and uncertainty. "We're literally traveling to another planet. It's overwhelming when I stop to think about it." Her colleague, Mike, the mission's pilot, nodded. "It's hard to comprehend. You look out the window, and all you see is blackness. Earth feels so distant now." There was a quiet tension in the spacecraft. They were all doing their jobs, maintaining their focus, but deep down, they knew the enormity of what they were attempting. The journey to Mars wasn't just about reaching another planet. It was about making humanity's future in space possible. The crew knew they were pioneers, carrying the weight of history on their shoulders. But beyond their personal struggles and challenges, there was an even greater sense of purpose. They weren't just astronauts. They were the first humans to ever attempt a mission of this scale. They were the forerunners of a new era, one in which humanity's reach extended beyond Earth's atmosphere and into the stars. On Earth, the excitement surrounding the mission was palpable. Millions of people were following the crew's journey, tracking Starship's progress as it traversed the void of space. Social media was flooded with posts from people all around the world, sharing their hopes, their dreams, and their questions about the future of space exploration. Elon Musk, despite the immense pressure he was under, took every opportunity to update the public on the mission's progress. He shared images of the crew in their spacesuits, conducting experiments, and maintaining the spacecraft. He also provided updates on the spacecraft's systems and safety, reassuring the public that the mission was on track. But behind the scenes, there was an even more intense focus on the next stage of the mission, preparing for the arrival at Mars. The team at SpaceX was already hard at work developing the systems that would allow the crew to land safely on the red planet. The key challenge would be getting Starship down to the Martian surface, where the thin atmosphere and rocky terrain posed significant risks. "We've got one shot at this," Musk told his engineers during a team meeting. "Landing on Mars isn't like landing on the moon. It's a whole new level of complexity. But we've got the technology, and we've got the right people. We can do this." The engineers and mission planners had been working on developing advanced landing technology for years, using simulations and testing to prepare for the Martian atmosphere. Starship's descent would be one of the most critical moments of the mission. Musk and his team knew that every detail had to go perfectly. The spacecraft would need to slow down enough to make a safe landing, but the limited atmosphere and unpredictable conditions made it a highly risky maneuver. "We've been preparing for this moment since day one," said Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, who had been at the forefront of the company's efforts to make this mission a reality. "We've tested the systems, we've run the simulations, and now it's about putting all that hard work into action." As the days passed and the spacecraft drew closer to Mars, the pressure mounted. Everyone at SpaceX, from the engineers to the mission planners, held their collective breath. The journey had been long, but the most difficult part was still ahead. Back aboard Starship, the crew continued their journey through the vast emptiness of space. They had reached the halfway point to Mars, and the psychological strain was beginning to take its toll. The crew worked tirelessly, maintaining their routine, but it wasn't easy. The isolation was hard to bear, and the excitement of the mission was starting to feel like a distant memory. Every member of the crew had moments of doubt, but they were determined to push through. They knew what was at stake. As they neared Mars, they prepared for the most critical phase of the mission, the descent and landing. The entire crew had been trained for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare them for the reality of it. They were about to descend into a new world. The day of the descent arrived. Musk and the entire SpaceX team were gathered in the control room, anxiously monitoring the spacecraft's approach to Mars. The data streams came in fast and furiously as Starship began its final descent toward the Martian surface. The crew would have to make the landing manually, adjusting for any potential anomalies that might arise during the process. "Everything's looking good," Gwynne Shotwell said, her voice steady, though there was a nervous edge to it. "We're on target for a successful landing." But as the spacecraft entered the Martian atmosphere, the tension in the room skyrocketed. The thin air made it harder for Starship to slow down, and the engineers were forced to make adjustments on the fly. For a moment, it seemed as if the spacecraft was going to overshoot its landing zone. Then, with a roar, the engines ignited, slowing the craft's descent. The heat shields glowed red as they entered the thickening atmosphere, and the crew held their breath, hoping the craft would survive the intense heat and pressure. And then, they landed. There was a collective exhale in the control room. The spacecraft had made a perfect landing on Mars. Starship's engines cut off, and the crew aboard looked out of their windows, gazing upon the barren Martian landscape for the first time. "This is it," Jane, the mission commander, said, her voice shaking with emotion. "We've made history." They had arrived. Humanity had touched down on Mars. The landing on Mars was a monumental achievement. The astronauts aboard Starship had successfully touched down on the surface of the red planet, and the world watched as the first humans ever set foot on a world beyond Earth. For the team at SpaceX, it was the culmination of years of planning, testing, and innovation. But for the astronauts, the real work was just beginning. Inside the spacecraft, the crew began to prepare for their first steps onto Mars. They had trained for months, simulating the Martian surface in the harshest of conditions. But no amount of training could replicate the real thing. The crew understood that the next steps were critical not only for their survival, but for the future of humanity's presence on Mars. Commander Jane, who had been the most vocal during the mission's preparation, stood in front of the airlock door. "All right, team," she said, her voice strong despite the mix of excitement and nerves. "We've landed. Now, let's do this. We're the first. Let's make sure we're the ones who make it work." Astronaut Mike, the mission's pilot, double-checked the systems on his suit, ensuring the life support equipment was fully functional. "I think we're ready," he said, nodding at Jane. "Let's go make history." The door to the airlock opened with a hiss, and the crew stepped out, each one of them looking out at the vast, barren landscape. Mars stretched out before them, red dust and rocky terrain as far as the eye could see. The sky was a strange shade of orange, with the sun appearing smaller than it did on Earth. The air was thin, and the ground was cold, the Martian atmosphere offering little protection from the harsh conditions of space. For a moment, there was silence. It was almost surreal, the kind of silence that only deep space could bring. Then, Jane broke the stillness with a single step. She planted her boot on the Martian surface. "We're here," she said, her voice crackling over the comms. "We've made it." The crew followed her lead, stepping out into the unknown. They took their first careful steps, each movement a testament to humanity's will to explore, to survive, and to build something that had never been done before. Back on Earth, the world was celebrating. News outlets broadcasted live feeds from Mars, showing the astronauts making history with each step they took. Social media exploded with excitement as people across the globe witnessed the momentous occasion. Elon Musk, the man who had made this mission possible, watched with a mix of pride and awe. Standing in the control room at SpaceX headquarters, he spoke to his team. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice full of conviction. "We've made it to Mars, but we've got so much more to do. We're not just visiting. We're building a future. We're setting the stage for humanity to become a multi-planetary species." The engineers and scientists at SpaceX exchanged looks of excitement. There was still so much to accomplish: constructing habitats, developing sustainable systems for food, water, and oxygen, and preparing for future missions. But Musk's vision was clearer than ever. This wasn't just about planting a flag on Mars. It was about creating a permanent presence, a place where humanity could not only survive but thrive. Meanwhile, the crew on Mars had started unpacking their equipment. The first order of business was to set up the habitat. They had been trained to work quickly and efficiently, knowing that the longer they stayed outside of the spacecraft, the more they risked exposure to the harsh Martian conditions. Jane oversaw the setup of the inflatable habitat, while Mike and the rest of the team began testing the systems, from the oxygen generators to the radiation shields. It was vital to ensure that everything worked as planned. They also began planting the first Martian crops in the greenhouse module, where they hoped to grow food using the limited resources available. Every move had to be calculated and precise. There was no room for error. The Martian environment was unforgiving, and every small success felt like a monumental achievement. As the habitat took shape and the systems began to function, the crew felt a sense of accomplishment, but they also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Surviving on Mars would require continuous adaptation and innovation. "Everything's up and running," Mike reported over the comms as he finished testing the power systems. "The habitat's fully pressurized, and the oxygen levels are stable. We've got a good start." Jane nodded. "Let's move to phase 2. We need to start setting up our communications with Earth. It's time to check in and let everyone know that we're here and we're making progress." Back at SpaceX, Musk and his team were closely monitoring the communication feeds from Mars. They had established a stable link with the crew, and the data was flowing smoothly. There were still communication delays due to the distance, but the crew on Mars had adjusted well to the lag. Every message took minutes to get through, but that didn't matter. They were in the process of doing something no one had ever done before. "We've set up the Mars base," Musk said, speaking to the media as he addressed a worldwide audience. "This is the beginning of humanity's future on Mars. But we're also working on the technology to make this permanent. This mission is about more than exploration. It's about sustainability. It's about survival." The next few months would be critical. The crew needed to make sure their systems were fully operational and that they could survive the long Martian nights, which lasted for nearly 14 Earth days. They would need to monitor the conditions carefully, ensuring that the habitat remained intact, that the crops grew successfully, and that they were able to maintain their oxygen and water levels. Every detail mattered. As the crew worked, the world continued to watch and cheer them on. But there were still challenges ahead. The Martian weather was unpredictable. Dust storms, which could last for days, were a constant threat to their safety. And the crew knew that their time on Mars was limited. They had a finite amount of supplies, and they had to be strategic about every decision they made. But there was hope. With every test, every success, and every step forward, the crew and SpaceX proved that humanity could thrive beyond Earth. The work on Mars wasn't easy, and the future remained uncertain, but it was clear that the dream of becoming a multi-planetary species was no longer just a dream. It was a reality. The first few weeks on Mars were marked by a whirlwind of activity. The astronauts had set up their habitat, established life support systems, and begun conducting vital experiments. Their initial success had filled the crew with optimism, but that optimism was tempered by the harsh reality of living on Mars. The Martian surface was both beautiful and unforgiving. The team had grown used to the eerie orange hue of the sky, the barren plains, and the jagged ridges in the distance. Yet, every day on the planet felt like a race against time. The crew's survival depended on their ability to innovate, solve problems, and adapt quickly to the unpredictable environment. Commander Jane stood at the observation window of the habitat, staring out at the endless Martian landscape. The wind howled outside, carrying with it a cloud of dust that blocked out the distant horizon. It was a stark reminder of the constant dangers they faced. "We need to get the solar panels repaired," Mike, the pilot, said as he approached her. "A dust storm like this is going to block out the sun for days. We can't afford to lose power." Jane nodded, her mind already racing through the logistics. They'd already experienced a couple of dust storms since landing, but nothing like this. The solar panels that provided their power were crucial for survival, and without them, their life support systems could fail. "Let's get to work," she replied. "We've trained for this. We just need to stay calm and fix it." Back at SpaceX's mission control on Earth, Elon Musk watched the live feeds from Mars. His fingers tapped nervously on the armrest of his chair as the team monitored the situation. The storm on Mars was bigger than they had anticipated. The dust was thick, and the atmospheric pressure was causing fluctuating temperatures in the habitat. The crew's survival could depend on whether they could get the solar panels back online before the storm intensified. "We can't afford to lose power," Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, said, glancing over the reports. "They've got enough oxygen and water for now, but that could change quickly. We need those panels fixed." Musk clenched his jaw. "We have to trust them. They're the best we've got." Despite the anxiety building within him, Musk knew that the crew had been trained for this. They had prepared for every possible contingency, and now it was time for them to prove their ability to overcome the odds. Back on Mars, Jane, Mike, and the rest of the crew were suited up and ready for their first major repair operation. The solar panels had been hit hard by the dust storm, and now it was their job to clean off the panels and ensure they could capture enough sunlight to recharge their power cells. "All right, everyone," Jane said, her voice steady through the comms. "Let's move quickly and carefully. We don't know how long the storm is going to last, and the sooner we get the panels working, the better." The team worked in sync, moving quickly but deliberately. Jane and Mike led the effort, while the others supported by securing tools, checking the structural integrity of the panels, and monitoring the health of the habitat systems. As they approached the solar array, they found it coated in a thick layer of Martian dust, which had accumulated during the storm. They began scraping the dust off, using their tools to clean the panels without damaging them. The process was slow and exhausting, but they kept their focus. Every minute that passed increased the risk that their life support systems would fail. "It's coming off," Mike said, his voice full of relief as the dust began to clear. But just as they made progress, another gust of wind whipped through the Martian landscape, kicking up a fresh layer of dust and causing the temperature to drop even further. Jane gritted her teeth. The storm was worsening, and they needed to act fast. "We've got to finish this now," she said, urgency creeping into her tone. "If we don't get the panels fixed, we won't have enough power to keep everything running." The crew redoubled their efforts, working faster than before. Time felt like it was slipping away as they continued to clean the solar panels and check the connections. Sweat beaded on Jane's forehead despite the cold of the Martian surface. Every minute counted. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last panel was cleaned, and the power began to stabilize. The system's power levels slowly started to rise, and the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. "We did it," Jane said, her voice filled with exhaustion and pride. "We've got power." The team retreated back to the habitat, sealing the airlock behind them as they entered the relative safety of their living space. The storm raged outside, but they had secured their power supply, for now. Back at SpaceX, the team watched as the power levels on Mars began to rise. They knew that the crew had made it through a crucial challenge, but there was still so much to be done. The dust storm was expected to last for several more days, and they would have to continue monitoring the situation closely. Gwen Shotwell spoke up. "We're lucky they got the panels fixed in time, but we need to ensure this doesn't happen again. We'll need to find a way to make the panels more resilient to these storms. The last thing we want is to be caught off guard like that." Musk nodded thoughtfully. "Agreed. But we've proven something important here today, that we can adapt. The team on Mars is capable of handling the toughest challenges. This mission is about survival, and every day is another test. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're on the right path." On Mars, the crew spent the next few days confined to their habitat, waiting out the storm. While the Martian dust continued to swirl outside, they turned their attention to the next task: refining their systems and preparing for the long-term challenges of life on Mars. Jane gathered the crew in the common area. "We're doing great so far, but we know this is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go, and a lot of things can go wrong. But we can't afford to get complacent. Every day we're here is a step closer to building a sustainable colony." The crew nodded, the weight of their responsibilities sinking in. They weren't just explorers. They were the first pioneers of a new world, and the decisions they made now would echo in the history of humankind. The storm on Mars eventually subsided, leaving behind a silent, desolate landscape. But the crew of Starship had learned a vital lesson: that survival on Mars would require constant vigilance, adaptability, and resilience. They weren't just learning to live on Mars. They were learning how to thrive. As the dust storm passed and the skies above Mars cleared, the crew of Starship settled into a new rhythm. The immediate threat of power loss had been averted, and the solar panels were functioning at full capacity once again. With the storm behind them, the crew could focus on the next crucial milestone: the first Martian harvest. For weeks, the team had worked tirelessly to set up their greenhouse, testing systems to grow food using the limited resources Mars provided. The small, enclosed space was filled with rows of plants, vegetables, grains, and even some early experiments with fruits. It was a fragile ecosystem, reliant on carefully controlled temperatures, humidity, and artificial lighting. But it represented more than just sustenance. It was a lifeline. Commander Jane and her team stood at the edge of the greenhouse, their faces illuminated by the faint light from the artificial sun above. A small but noticeable change had occurred in the plants, the first signs of life, the beginnings of the Martian harvest. "Looks like we've got something," Mike, the mission pilot, said, his voice filled with excitement. He pointed to a patch of lettuce, its green leaves starting to unfurl in the carefully controlled environment. Jane stepped closer, her eyes scanning the crop. "This is huge," she said softly. "This is the first step toward real sustainability on Mars." The crew had trained for years in earthbound greenhouses, But nothing could compare to the feeling of seeing the plants they had worked so hard to nurture actually grow on Mars. It was proof that human ingenuity could overcome the planet's hostile conditions, at least for a short time. But they were far from out of the woods. The question still loomed. Could they make this system sustainable in the long term? Back at SpaceX, Elon Musk sat in his office, watching the live feed from Mars. His eyes were fixed on the images of the first crops growing in the Martian greenhouse. For all the technical challenges and setbacks, this simple moment of growth meant everything. It wasn't just about survival. It was about showing the world that humanity could thrive beyond Earth. This is a milestone, Musk said to his team in a meeting. It's one thing to get to Mars, but it's another to live there. To eat, to breathe, to grow something, that's the real challenge. The future of humanity depends on this. He paused, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. But we're not stopping here. We need to scale this up. These first plants are proof that it's possible, but we need to create a larger system, a sustainable one that can support more people. This is just the beginning. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, looked over the data coming from Mars. The greenhouse is working better than expected. But the next step is to make it more resilient, to protect the crops from potential hazards like radiation and the Martian soil's toxicity. We'll need to build something even bigger and more advanced if we want a permanent colony. Musk nodded. Exactly. We've learned a lot already. Now, it's time to think bigger. We're not just solving problems for today. We're laying the foundation for humanity's future on Mars. Back on Mars, the crew celebrated their small victory. The greenhouse, though modest, had proven successful in producing food. But they knew that they needed to go beyond small-scale gardening. The next step would be scaling up their production system to ensure that they could grow enough food to sustain themselves for the long term. "All right, team," Jane said one evening, gathered around a table inside the habitat. "We've got our first crop. Now we need to figure out how we can make it bigger. We need more food, more water, and more space. We're going to need a larger greenhouse and a better system for recycling water. Everything we do here has to be efficient." Mike, always the practical one, raised a concern. "The soil here isn't great for growing. We're using Earth's soil in the greenhouse right now, but that's not sustainable. Eventually, we'll run out. We'll need to find a way to work with Mars soil or develop an entirely new growing medium." Jane nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "We'll need to start researching Martian soil. There are theories that suggest we could use it for growing, but we'll need to test those theories ourselves. And we'll need to test everything, the nutrients, the pH levels, and how it reacts to the plants we're growing. It's going to be a long-term project." "Let's get to work," Mike said with a determined smile. "We've got a planet to colonize." As the days passed, the crew took their first steps towards scaling up their food production. They set up additional experiments, testing different types of crops and refining their understanding of Mars' unique soil composition. Some of their efforts were promising, while others were met with failure. But each day brought new data, new lessons, and new ideas. The crew also started to experiment with Martian resources in other areas. They began working on a system to extract water from the planet's ice deposits, an essential part of their long-term survival plan. The process was slow and painstaking, but with each success, they were becoming more self-sufficient. Jane kept a journal of their progress, documenting each new challenge and every small victory. "Mars is teaching us that nothing comes easy," she wrote in one entry. "But the more we push, the more we learn. And the more we learn, the closer we get to making this a permanent home." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the excitement around the Mars mission continued to grow. SpaceX had proven that human life was possible on Mars, even if only for a short time. But the real question remained. Could humanity thrive there? Could they build a colony that could survive and grow? Musk's vision of a self-sustaining colony on Mars was closer than ever, but it would require immense effort and innovation. The next steps would involve solving bigger challenges, producing more food, refining energy systems, and, ultimately, building the infrastructure that could support a larger population. "We've taken the first step," Musk said in a recent interview. "But we're far from done. We're just getting started." Mars is the future of humanity. On Mars, Jane stood once again in the greenhouse, now filled with more plants than ever before. The harvest was growing, and the team was making real progress. But she knew that this was just one part of a much larger puzzle. The challenges of living on Mars were enormous, and every day brought new obstacles. But with each success, they inched closer to creating a sustainable future. We're making history, Jane thought as she looked out at the Martian landscape. And it's just the beginning. As the crew of Starship settled into a rhythm on Mars, it seemed as though the worst of the challenges had been faced. The power systems were working flawlessly, the greenhouse was thriving, and the first signs of sustainability were beginning to take shape. But, as they had learned time and again, Mars had its own agenda, and it was far from predictable. One quiet evening, as the crew sat around the table inside the habitat, an alarm suddenly blared, cutting through the calm. It was an unusual sound, one they had not heard before. Jane was the first to react, quickly pulling up the system diagnostics on the main screen. Warning, the system said in cold, mechanical tones. Oxygen levels dropping. Life support systems compromised. What the hell? Mike exclaimed, standing up immediately. We just checked the systems this morning. They were all fine. Jane's heart raced as she scanned the data. The oxygen tanks, which were supposed to supply the habitat with fresh air for several weeks, were showing a significant drop in pressure. More alarm bells started ringing across the room as the backup systems also reported failures. This is bad, Jane muttered, her mind already racing through possible causes. The life support systems are integrated. If one goes down, it could affect everything. We need to act fast, said Rachel, the habitat engineer. She was already running through possible solutions in her head. I'll go check the pressure valves and lines. Maybe there's a leak somewhere. Jane nodded, trying to stay calm. Mike, start checking the backup systems. Ensure we have enough oxygen to last us while Rachel investigates. Back at SpaceX headquarters, news of the crisis on Mars spread quickly. Elon Musk and the rest of the team gathered in the mission control room, watching the real-time data from Mars. Musk's face was a mask of concentration as he followed the unfolding situation. We have to assume the worst-case scenario, Gwynne Shotwell said, glancing at the team of engineers around her. We need to guide them through this. If they can't get the oxygen system back online, they'll have limited time before the atmosphere inside the habitat becomes uninhabitable. Have we analyzed the possible causes? Musk asked. At this point, it could be a leak, a failure in one of the core components, or an issue with the CO2 scrubbers, Gwynne replied, her voice steady but concerned. We'll need to rely on their expertise to pinpoint the problem. If they can't find a fix, we'll need to bring in the backup systems from the reserve supply. Musk nodded grimly. Let's get the engineers on the line with them. I want a real-time troubleshooting session. This is a test of everything we've built so far. Back on Mars, the crew worked frantically to pinpoint the issue. The seconds felt like hours as they searched for the source of the problem. Rachel was in the oxygen room, checking each pressure valve one by one, while Mike and the others combed through the backup systems. Jane was on the comms with mission control, trying to relay their findings in real time. Rachel, talk to me, Jane said, her voice tight with tension. I'm not seeing anything obvious, Rachel replied. I've checked the valves, and they seem fine. I'll check the CO2 scrubbers now. Do it fast, Mike urged, his voice growing more anxious. We're losing air in here. If the scrubbers fail, we're done for. The team's hearts raced as Rachel worked quickly to assess the scrubbers. The problem was clear now. The scrubbers had malfunctioned, causing a dangerous accumulation of carbon dioxide in the habitat. Without a functioning scrubber, the air quality would deteriorate rapidly, suffocating the crew. We've got a problem, Rachel said, her voice echoing over the comms. The CO2 scrubbers are down. Without them, we can't keep the air breathable. We need to fix this immediately. Musk's face was taut with concern as he listened to the situation unfold. His mind raced through the possible solutions. The technology was in place, but Mars had its own unique challenges. There were no quick fixes in a Martian habitat. Every solution required precision and timing. Can they repair it? Gwynne asked. We have to assume they can, Musk said. We trained them for this. Rachel's a top engineer, and Mike's got the technical expertise. We've built this system to withstand failures, but this is a worst-case scenario. Let's get the backup CO2 scrubbers ready to go, just in case. Back on Mars, The team knew they had no time to waste. The CO2 levels inside the habitat were rising steadily. Without the scrubbers functioning, the crew had only hours before the situation became life-threatening. "We've got a spare CO2 scrubber in the storage bay," Rachel said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I can install it, but it's going to take a few hours." "We don't have hours," Jane replied, her mind racing. "We need to come up with a quick fix. Can we jerry-rig something with the tools we have?" Mike paced back and forth, thinking aloud. What if we bypassed the system temporarily? We could vent some of the CO2 outside the habitat manually, reduce the levels just enough to buy us some time. If we can get the backup scrubber installed in the meantime, it might work. Jane considered the idea. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only option they had. "Do it," she said, making the decision quickly. "Let's get it done." The crew moved fast, working in perfect synchronicity to vent the CO2 and reroute the oxygen system to buy them some time. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it worked, for now. They kept the pressure low and managed to stay ahead of the rapidly rising CO2 levels, but it was a race against time. As the hours ticked by, the tension inside the habitat mounted. Sweat dripped from their faces, the pressure weighing heavily on everyone. Rachel worked tirelessly to install the backup scrubber, with Mike assisting her, carefully coordinating every move. They could feel the clock ticking, and every second felt like it brought them closer to disaster. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rachel and Mike completed the installation. The new scrubber powered on, and the CO2 levels began to fall. "We're back in business," Rachel said, her voice shaking with relief. Jane let out a deep breath, her shoulders sagging as the stress of the past hours lifted. "Great work, everyone. Let's get the systems back to normal, and let's never go through this again." Back at SpaceX, Musk watched the data with a mixture of relief and admiration. The crew had pulled through once again, but the crisis had reminded him of something fundamental. Mars would never be an easy place to live. Every day would be a test, and every test would push them further. They had barely escaped disaster, but they had shown the world what humanity was capable of. "They did it," Gwen said, her voice a mixture of awe and respect. "They're tougher than anyone gives them credit for." Musk nodded. "This is just a glimpse of the future. The real work begins now." On Mars, the crew was exhausted but victorious. They had overcome the crisis, and their systems were back online. But as Jane gazed out at the barren landscape of Mars, she knew that this was just another obstacle in a long series of challenges. They had come so far, but the road ahead would be even more difficult. "Tomorrow," she thought, "we get back to work. We have a planet to build." The events of the past few days weighed heavily on the crew. They had come close to disaster, but they had also proven something crucial: they were capable. They had faced the worst possible scenario in space, and they had triumphed. Now, they had to build on that success. The question of survival on Mars was no longer theoretical. It was real, it was tangible, and they were making it happen, one step at a time. The night after the crisis, the crew gathered for their usual debriefing, their faces showing signs of exhaustion but also a shared sense of accomplishment. The oxygen and CO2 systems were back in working order, and they had made significant progress in other areas of the mission. The greenhouse was thriving, and new data from their soil experiments suggested they were on the right track for growing Martian crops. But Jane knew they couldn't afford to become complacent. The planet was still an enemy in many ways, and every day was a battle. "We've been through hell," Jane said, her voice steady but firm, "but we're still here. That's something." Rachel nodded, the weight of their recent work still fresh on her mind. "We're not just surviving anymore, though. We're adapting. We're building a future." Mike sat back, his eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but the foundation is solid. We've proven we can solve problems together." The crew shared a brief moment of camaraderie, knowing that their bond had been strengthened by the trials they'd faced. Mars had tested them in ways they never imagined, but they were still standing, still pushing forward. Back on Earth, Elon Musk stood in front of a podium at a press conference, addressing a crowd of reporters and enthusiasts who had been eagerly following the progress of SpaceX's Mars mission. The mission was now officially a success in the eyes of the world. Humanity had reached Mars, had stayed there, and had overcome a major crisis. Musk's tone was confident, but still tempered by the knowledge that the hardest work lay ahead. "I'm incredibly proud of the team on Mars," Musk said, his voice steady. "What they've accomplished in such a short amount of time is nothing short of extraordinary. But this is just the beginning. We've proven that it's possible to live and thrive on Mars, but now we have to make sure it's sustainable. This is the next chapter, not just for SpaceX, but for all of humanity." The crowd applauded, but Musk's mind was elsewhere. He was already thinking of the future, of the next steps. There were still too many unknowns, and there were too many obstacles to overcome. Mars had shown them its brutal side, but it had also shown them its potential. "We've got a lot more to do," he continued, his voice resolute. "We need to build permanent infrastructure, create more sustainable food systems, and expand our presence. Mars is just the first step. The ultimate goal is to make humanity a multiplanetary species. We're not just going to Mars. We're going to build a future there." Back on Mars, Jane and her crew were deep in planning mode, strategizing how to overcome the next phase of challenges. They had successfully dealt with the oxygen crisis, and now they had to focus on long-term sustainability. The Martian soil research had yielded promising results, but they needed to expand their growing capabilities. The next step was scaling up, not just for themselves, but for the future of any settlers who might one day join them on Mars. "This place is starting to feel like home," Mike said one evening as they sat around their dining table, watching the Martian sunset through the habitat's thick glass. "But it's a long road ahead. We've got the tools, but we need more resources if we're going to scale up to a real colony." Jane nodded thoughtfully. "We need to start thinking about resource extraction. We've got water in the ice, and we know we can grow food here. But we need more than that. We'll need to mine, build, and manufacture things locally to support a growing population. How do we even begin?" Rachel asked, looking at the blueprints on the table. "We're talking about infrastructure that we've only dreamed about. How do we start laying the groundwork for something bigger?" "We start small," Jane replied. "We use what we've learned here. We build from the ground up. We test and adapt. But we have a clear goal in mind: sustainability." The team began working on plans for the future: how to expand the greenhouse, how to establish an energy-efficient production system, how to use Martian resources for building materials. They weren't just pioneers. They were architects of a new world, laying the foundation for the future of humankind. Meanwhile, back at SpaceX, Elon Musk's thoughts were fixed on the long-term vision. While the crew on Mars focused on survival and sustainability, Musk was preparing the next steps: building the infrastructure to support a permanent human presence on the Red Planet. He gathered his top engineers and scientists for a strategy meeting. The subject: the next generation of Mars missions, and how to support not just a small crew, but a full colony. SpaceX had already developed the Starship, but Musk knew they would need more, much more. "We've built a great base with the Starship," Musk said, looking around the table, "but we need more robust systems, larger habitats, and a true self-sustaining colony. We've proven the concept. Now, we need to scale up." His engineers were already brainstorming ideas: more advanced life support systems, autonomous mining and construction robots, and more efficient methods for extracting water and oxygen. The goal was clear: build a city on Mars that could function independently without constant resupply from Earth. Musk wasn't just thinking about his legacy. He was thinking about the future of the human race. This isn't about getting a few people to Mars. This is about establishing a presence. Mars will be our first step toward becoming a multiplanetary species. It's not just about us. It's about every generation that comes after us. Back on Mars, Jane and her crew stood on the roof of their habitat one morning, watching the Martian sunrise. The wind was calm, the air thin but breathable, and the horizon stretched out in front of them. An endless, alien world. They had made it. They were the first humans to survive on Mars, and they were starting to build the foundations for the future. "How many years before this place is a city?" Rachel asked, her voice quiet but full of wonder as she looked out at the barren landscape. Jane paused, reflecting on the enormity of the question. "I don't know. It could be decades. But we're setting the stage. We're proving that it's possible. We're building the future," Mike added, a smile on his face. "This is just the beginning." As they stood there, a quiet sense of accomplishment filled the air. The world had watched them struggle, watched them succeed, and watched them prove that humanity could adapt and survive on the red planet. The road ahead was still long, but they were no longer just surviving. They were thriving, and the future of Mars was unfolding before them. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?